But the problem is Dick Cheney is not in jail. And if I keep this up, I may soon be. Okay. Will you come visit me if they... Okay, all right. All right. So I got a hold of this Major Don Arias. Really wonderful, a nice guy. My father was Air Force. My mother had been cryptanalyst for Secretary of State Cordell Hull during the Second World War at the Army Security Agency, which was the forerunner of the NSA. My father left the Air Force, went to work for Martin Marietta on Titan 3C, which was the booster for all of the CIA's field spy satellites. Everybody in my family had a clearance. I used to come home from school and say, "What's for dinner?" And Mom would say, "I can't tell you." But I get along good with Air Force people because I was an Air Force brat. So I'm yakking, and I make good friends with this Major Don Arias, who is the public affairs officer at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, which is where the first scramble orders were issued on 9/11. And he was working that day. And he finally sent me an email after I'm asking him those questions and made friends. And he actually confirmed that the live fly exercise, all of the code-named exercises have meanings in the military. They have books by who can use vigilant, who can use warrior, and what the combination of words mean. And he sent me back a written confirmation that the exercise mentioned by General Myers was a live fly hijack drill. Now, what that means for you lay people out there is that an Air Force officer from NORAD confirmed to me that NORAD was flying airplanes that were posing as hijacked airliners on September the 11th. You haven't heard anything about that, have you? No, you ought to read the book. It's a good book. An interesting thing about Don Arias. Don Arias has a brother who worked at the World Trade Center. And as I'm piecing together forensically the timelines, as I'm piecing together, and my God, it was mind-breaking work. Ken saw me many times unshaven and disheveled and with kind of the mad scientist look. It occurred to me, and it became very clear, that everybody in the system knew that Flight 175, the second plane to hit the World Trade Center, had been hijacked, and nobody warned the people in the South Tower. And then I found one press account that Don Arias had actually left his post that day to call his brother in the World Trade Center and told him to get out because nobody else was warning anybody. And that was Major Arias's motive for sending me the confirmation. It's a very telling and it's a very heart-rending chapter to read the callousness with which Rudy Giuliani, Dick Cheney, General Ralph Eberhart, General Richard Myers, all of the National Military Command Center staff, and everybody in the PEOC sat there and let the people in the South Tower die because they knew the second plane was coming, and I proved that they knew it was coming, and they just let him die. Now, whoever was coordinating the Air Force war games was under the management direction of Dick Cheney, who was also in charge of another terror drill being set up on the west side of New York. It was a bioterror drill called Tripod 2 being set up on Pier 29 on Manhattan's Lower West Side. And FEMA was already there, and if you read the paper trail that was putting Dick Cheney in charge of all the war game planning back in May, he was coordinating all training, not just in the military, because the FBI, Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, Centers for Disease Control, et cetera, are not military. So all of that was placed under the aegis or under the umbrella of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Administration. And FEMA was setting up a complete command post on the morning of September the 11th, just by coincidence, another war game. And that command post was used, as a matter of fact, by one of my several key persons of interest in the attacks of 9/11, Jerome Hauer, who was a bioterror expert connected with about every evil pharmaceutical company you can possibly imagine. But everything led back to one man and one man only, Dick Cheney, in the basement of the White House. Now, there's two separate command centers in the White House. You have the Situation Room upstairs, which is the place from where Richard Clark, Norm Mineta, when he was traveling, but all the government officials were officially doing his work. But there's some interesting quotes in Richard Clark's book, and this is another one that made me laugh, that where Clark keeps saying, I can't figure out why the vice president keeps hanging up on me. Gee. This is a case that I, as a detective, would take to a district attorney tomorrow. I would take crossing the Rubicon, drop it in the lap of a DA, and I say, I want a filing for murder, premeditated, first degree, multiple counts with special circumstances. Now, we talked briefly about the Energy Task Force, NEPDG. Everybody started fighting their secrecy way back long before 9/11. Way back before the first plane hit. Congressman Henry Waxman of California fought very hard. The Sierra Club fought very hard. Judicial Watch fought very hard. Lawsuits were filed. 7 pages of documents finally leaked, just 7, from the NEPDG. And among them was a list of every oil company and every bit of ownership in all the oil fields in Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates. That's one of the things that were listed. Basically what they were talking about was, where is all the oil in the world and who do we have to deal with, bribe, kill, or make friends, or blackmail to get it? Now, as you put the maps that came out of NEPDG together, this is a map I constructed from their maps because I had to do a cut and paste overlay, but this is the oil fields they were looking at. Now, I want you to understand something. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is 60% of all the recoverable oil on planet Earth. 60%. If you overlay that into the state of Texas, you see roughly the size of the area. Now, where have we deployed since 9/11? Well, gee, we deployed all around here. We put troops up here in Georgia. We've occupied Iraq. We've got Turkey's part of NATO. We're heavily involved in Israel. Yeah, we've got troops now in Yemen and Djibouti. The British control Oman. We have surrounded 60% of all the oil on the planet. It's consistent with the motive, is it not? And that 60% is going to become very important when you understand that, we'll come to this later on, oil discoveries have been in progressive decline since 1962. There's no more oil to find. I will prove that to you before the night's over. Or very little oil left to find. So if that's all there is, that's what you got to get. And whoever gets it eats, and whoever doesn't get it dies, which is going to make Iran all the more critical, which is part of that herd of charging elephants that are descending upon us. Let's go back to May 2001, a critical month, when the NEPDG report was released. America in the year 2001 faces the most serious energy shortage since the oil embargoes of the 1970s. Estimates indicate that over the next 20 years, U.S. oil consumption will increase by 33%, natural gas by well over 50%, and demand for electricity by 45%. U.S. energy consumption is expected to increase by about 32% by 2020. Between 2000 and 2020, U.S. natural gas demand is projected by the Energy Information Administration to increase by more than 50%. Yet we produce 39% less oil today than we did in 1970. 1970 was the year that the United States oil production peaked. We have been in irreversible decline since 1970 within the United States, leaving us ever more reliant on foreign suppliers. On our present course, America 20 years from now will import nearly 2 of every 3 barrels of oil, a condition of increased dependency on foreign powers that, quote unquote, do not always have America's best interests at heart. My response to that is, why the hell should they? These are the war game exercises. Again, part of this, I would encourage you to get the book and read it so that you can understand what happened on 9/11, because you will look ahead for future announcements of war games or anything like war games, and you will look for possible connections or possible patterns developing similar to that. And I want to stress that since the book has been published, I've confirmed 2 more separate war games, all of which were scheduled on September the 11th.